Because I always thought it was wonderful that the church is called Lover's Lane.
Oh, yeah. Leonard Sweet said it's the best name in Christendom. Just tell everybody once you were named after a street in Dallas, and now you're named after the greatest lover that the world has ever known. I thought he was talking about me, but he was talking about Jesus, I think.
Yeah.
Welcome to God Have Mercy.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us. Stan Copeland, my good friend. 2 boot stand, 1 boot stand.
Yeah.
We have inside jokes that we can't share on the podcast, but that's okay.
No.
Stan,
No,
you and I,
we can't.
you've known I guess about 11 years since I moved to Texas, and we've been in a pastors group together for pastors in Texas, and kind of been friends through the journey of denominational stuff the last few years, and just become good friends, and just thought it'd be great to catch up to you because I heard this rumor.
Yes?
That you are retiring this year.
I am retiring this year.
So
It's
I'm
not
like,
a room.
so I thought, hey, this would be a great time to talk about, to stand about all sorts of things, but I'm really intrigued by these threshold crossing seasons in life, and how spiritually we kind of walk through those things. So, Matt, have you met Stan before?
No, I have not. Well, in passing, I have met you through a TMF group that I was a part of. And then I mean, Lover's Lane, I'm a person, a long time recovery, and part of my recovery story goes through Lover's Lane.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like I've known Matt because I'm a fan of Pod Have Mercy, and y'all do a super job, and y'all were one of the first to do it really well. I felt like. Matt, we're building a new recovery center across the street. About an $11,000 building. It's going to be state of the art, and we're cutting the ribbon on it on March the 8th.
Is it where those buildings y'all have hosted recovery meetings for 100 years over? Okay.
The same house, same footprint.
Okay.
And we just came up with a new house that looks a lot like the old one on the outside, but on the inside, it's really well equipped. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's good.
When we went,
about 1,000 people a week go through those recovery programs.
I was one of them for a while. I was one of them.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, we took a group of folks when we were planning Mercy Street up there too, just to see what churches could do. Yep.
That's fascinating.
So,
yeah, and I took a trip to Mercy Street along the line too when I first came to Lover's Lane.
That's great.
Well, Stan, we'll get to retirement and kind of your thoughts about all of that. But why don't you share, just for people who are listening, a little bit about yourself? Kind of, I know as people listen to you speak, it's like listening to me. They realize that you're not from up north. So why don't you give everybody just a little
north
taste.
of Houston.
North of Houston.
Never
That's
been
right.
taken for a Yankee.
The north of the country.
Yeah. I grew up in the Texas Conference and grew up in a little East Texas town outside of Chandler.
Oh yeah.
And was United Methodist all my life. My parents were baptized in my home church 88 years ago. So mom or dad would be the conference delegate every year. So I grew up going to annual conference in Houston and ended up doing ministry down there for 7 years. And I worked with a lot of South Georgians. And so, John, that's why you and I became friends. I could speak South Georgia.
That's right.
Or at least I could understand it.
You could understand it. That's true.
Yeah.
So when you were growing up, I mean, talk a little bit about your call to ministry and going into ministry, because you started young.
Yeah, I did. We had a pastor when I was probably 10 or 11 who came our way, and he was a single man, and he was our youth director, our scoutmaster, our trip to Tyler on a Saturday night. He had an old yellow station wagon that would hold 15 kids unseat belted, and he just poured himself into us. And I credit Byron Jarrett, who's a retired pastor in Texas Conference, as leading me along the line of accepting a call. And I preached my first sermon at the invitation of the pastor of my home church, Larry Sikora, who was an associate pastor at Chapelwood back in the day. But he had come up to Chandler to be our pastor. And I preached my first sermon when I was 16 on the Sunday night after Christmas. Now, who wants to preach on the Sunday night after Christmas? Well, I did, and so it's been nearly 50 years. This is my 49th year of preaching, and I went to Lon Morris College and Centenary College, getting ready to be a preacher, and to seminary right after that. So I went to St. Paul School of Theology in Kansas City Seminary.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. I would have thought you would have gone to SMU, but how did you end up?
Well, everybody did back then, and I was just attracted to going beyond my house 100 miles. You know, I'd been educated within a 100-mile radius of the house, so that was an attraction actually. But I loved the seminary up there and my professors, and it was a great experience.
So, in your ministry, once you've got Houston connections, Houston, Texas connections. So, kind of when you started out in ministry, you worked with Bill Henson, who was from South Georgia and came to be pastor of First United Methodist Church in Houston. I think at the time it was one of the biggest churches in the denomination.
It was. Yeah, I'd actually contracted terminal leukemia. I was in Henderson, Texas, and so I needed to get down to Houston to be close to MD Anderson, actually, where I got on an experimental drug protocol and was Bill's associate for 7 years. I can't say enough good about that church and my time in that church and my time in Houston. You know, a lot of my story revolves around that era in Houston. And I loved working with Bill, all the staff there, very influential on my life.
Were you there when there was a shooting there? One of the associate pastors was.
No, I came a few weeks after that. Actually, Paul Wilkie was going to replace Eric Anderson, who was shot to death in the office, and I replaced another associate in my coming. I started in 1986, I guess.
Wow. So how did you like being in Houston?
I loved Houston. Yeah, we really have
Houston. I've learned Houston and Dallas have this thing.
Oh gosh, yeah, they really do. And we've lived in both places. You know, I'm a rural guy, as you know, but I've spent 35 of my 41 years in Houston and Dallas. So they're two very different cities.
We're gonna make you some enemies real quick. So what city's better, Houston or Dallas?
In some ways, Houston is, and in some ways, Dallas is, John.
Let's ask it like this: Dallas Cowboys or the Houston Texans?
Well,
don't ask me that. Don't ask me a Mavericks question either.
What about a baseball?
Yeah. It's interesting. That's I was told about the Houston-Dallas thing before I moved here when I was coming to Houston, and from a young woman in my church in Georgia who grew up in Dallas.
Yeah.
And she explained to me I thought from a pretty unbiased perspective, Houston, the way she said is in Houston, people say, "What do you do?" And in Dallas, they either say, "What part of Dallas are you from?" They want to know where you're from, like what neighborhood, or like who's your family.
How much do you make? What are you worth?
It's kind of like area. Oh, you're from Highland Park. Oh, I know you. I know what kind of person you are. But so when you finished in Houston, then you went because now you've been at Lover's Lane, which is a large church in Dallas. You've been there for how many years?
I'll preach my 28th Palm Sunday sermon this year. Yeah. And my Easter sermon will be my last. That'll be my 28th Easter sermon. And I came here at the age of 38, 27 plus years ago.
And right before you came to Lover's Lane, where were you?
I was actually in Tyler. I went from Houston to Pollard United Methodist in Tyler. And I was there for nearly 5 years. And I was appointed here at Lover's Lane on April Fool's Day. 1998.
Now, for people who don't know, in the United Methodist Church, that would have been an appointment across conference boundary, right? That would have been a different conference.
Oh, yeah. And I knew very little about the North Texas Conference at the time. I didn't know hardly anything about Lover's Lane except that they had a lot of alcoholics and a lot of singles. That's about it. And
and you
I
thought
had
that's a good combination. I'm going.
Yeah, that's right. And here I am, Matt. But I just thought
That thing got me in trouble.
I thought, I'm not going to ever leave the Texas Conference, but I did.
So tell everybody a little bit. I mean, you've heard Matt shared his important impact at Lover's Lane Recovery Ministry, but tell everybody a little bit about Lover's Lane as a church and kind of your ministry there in 28 years and kind of what's the charism of the church and the identity and unique about it, but also what's changed. I mean, that's a long season of ministry. What things have you seen that have changed, and just kind of give people sort of an understanding of who Lover's Lane is.
All right, I'll do my best.
Because I always thought it was wonderful that the church is called Lover's Lane.
Oh, yeah. Leonard Sweet said it's the best name in Christendom. Just tell everybody once you were named after a street in Dallas, and now you're named after the greatest lover that the world has ever known. I thought he was talking about me, but he was talking about Jesus, I think. But, this church has had, I'm the fourth pastor in 81 years.
Wow.
That's one thing that's very odd about Lover's Lane. I know Chapelwood may be one of the only churches that would rival that, because I know Kelly Williams was there a long time. But
yeah, I'm the fifth pastor in 75 years.
Yeah. Tom Shipp was the pastor for 31 years, and Tom Shipp was raised an orphan. His story is unbelievable. In 1960, he gave the International AA keynote address. But Lover's Lane, some of the early members of Lover's Lane were alcoholics, and Lover's Lane was one of the only churches back in the 1940s, 44, when it started, that was actually open to welcoming alcoholics. And so that oddity about Lover's Lane really did cause it to grow. In 1968, I think it was the fourth largest Methodist church, and it was said to have 350 alcoholic families in the church. Wow. And it was said about Tom Shipp that every prominent citizen in Dallas who was an alcoholic eventually found their way to Tom Shipp's doorstep.
Yeah, that's true.
So, in 1960, the first African American was welcomed into the church. That's 3 years before Kennedy was assassinated and before the civil rights legislation was ratified. So this church, and largely due to its first pastor, colored outside the lines. I think it got the fact that Tom was an associate at Highland Park before coming to Lover's Lane, but I think it got the fact that it had to live into its own skin. You know, it had to be its own church. It couldn't look over its shoulder and try to be a mini Highland Park or up the tollway to the suburbs to try to be a church like the suburban churches. So we've done our best when we've tried to color outside the lines and be ourselves and be different. We've done our worst when we've tried to mimic other churches, I think, through the years. And we've done a little of both of it while I've been here. But I do think that that we have really kind of come back to our roots in many ways. We've got a lot of African people here on a Sunday morning from about 14 different countries, and we've got a huge recovery ministry. Nearly 1,000 people a week go through our groups, which are on the classic AA model. We've got a significant deaf ministry here that really is somewhat international now. And, Sunday morning, they just all mix together. We've got 7 different worship services, different venues, and different styles. It's been a joy to serve it. It hadn't always been easy, because I think the kind of ministry that we do, there is a sense in which the homogenous factor kicks in, and people do worship with people who look like them and are in the same social class, if you will. But here, it's a very different setting with all of the differences that we have. For example, our youth group and our children's ministry is probably half black. Lots of different cultures represented in those ministries. So I don't know. It's been the church of my dreams in a lot of ways. I've always wanted to serve a church that was kind of reaching out to the marginalized, or those that the church really should be about. And I've been very blessed to be here. And I think that will only continue, because I think they do get their culture here at Lover's Lane.
You told a story, and I don't remember the details of it, but I wanted you to share it. And I think it was either about Tom Shipp or something, but the story of the guy came to the altar for communion.
Yeah.
And tell that story. That was you included that in one of your books too, but I've heard you tell it before. It's just a powerful story, and you used it a lot. Used it a lot during our conversations in the United Methodist Church when there was a lot of debate on what kind of church we were going to be, and people were upset about inclusion and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, thanks. Tom Shipp and his three siblings, they were basically raised as orphans. Their mother died when Tom was 5. Father worked for the railroad, couldn't really raise them on his own. His mother helped until she died, and when the grandmother died, those kids had to be farmed out, in essence, in South Missouri to German farming families. And Tom ended up I think he was 15 or 16, when he ended up with one family. And as he told the story, he washed his hands at the well after the chores were done. And he went into the house, and there was a table there, and there was enough space for 4 people. The father, the mother, and had 2 kids. And the father said, "Boy, you don't eat here at our table. You eat out on the porch. And when we get through eating, I'll bring you your food, and you'll sleep in the barn." And so for a year and a half, he ate by himself on the porch, and he slept in the barn, and he worked for room and board, basically, and went to school. And after a while, he told his dad he really needed a change. He needed another family, that wasn't working out. So his dad talked to a man named Les Coons. And Les was a German farming family. And so Tom went to live with Les. He said the first day was similar to the first day at the other home. He did his chores, washed his hands, and went inside, and there was a place set at the table for him. And so he ate with the family. He had his own bed. But he said that next week, they took me to town, and he said they bought me my first new pair of clothes and first new shoes I'd ever worn. And he said it was a family. And that Sunday, he said they took me to church for the first time. And it was Holy Communion Sunday in the little Methodist church, and they had one of those center pulpits, and the table in front, and the altar rail that wrapped around. And he said he was sitting there with his family, and just kind of watching what was going on, wide-eyed. And so his family got up, and he went with them, and he knelt there beside Les Coons, who was on his left, and on his right at the altar rails knelt the man who he used to live with, the other farmer. And Tom was watching as the pastor was passing the tray with the little crackers and the little juice cups, and when it got to him, he reached up to get one of the little crackers, and the man on his right grabbed his wrist and wouldn't let him receive communion. And Les Coons leaned forward, and he said, "It's not your table." And he still wouldn't let him go, and so Coons said a little louder, "It's not your table." And Tom said when he still wouldn't let him go, that Les said in a voice the whole church heard, "It's not your table." And the man released his hand, and he received communion for the first time. And, I like to say that it's not your table rang in Tom's ears the rest of his life. And he died at the age of 58 in a finance committee meeting when the sanctuary was coming out of the ground here. But he proceeded to live out what he had experienced in that little Methodist church in South Missouri, through the grace of Les Coons, who I guess forever put those words in his ears. Hey, it's not your table, it's the Lord's. And at this table, all are welcome, even little orphan boys who some people may not value.
That's a powerful story.
Is that the one, John?
Oh,
or was
yeah,
it
no,
another?
that's exactly the one. Yeah, it's not your table.
Yeah.
I mean, that's I've thought of that story often. I've not used it, but it resonates.
I've been working on a book with that title for 10 years now, which is nearly done. But I've decided with the coming of my successor that I'm going to write it. Dear Eddie Rester is coming to be our pastor here at Lover's Lane, and I thought that now with the new pastor coming in, that new pastor needs to know the culture here.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is from a manuscript, actually, that was written about Tom Shipp's life that never was published. The author's dead now. But she went to where Tom was raised and got these wonderful stories. And also his account of ministry, through the 31 years that he was here. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the book in the next couple of months and pass it on to my successor.
Yeah, and your successor, Eddie Rester, has been on this podcast at least once, maybe more than that. And he and Chris McAlilly do a podcast called The Wait. So we've done a sort of a cross thing together, so people who listen to this are going to know Eddie, and he's going to be the new pastor at Lover's Lane. Yeah,
he's landing right now here in Dallas, and going to spend a week trying to find a home here in Dallas, and I think he's going to be a really perfect match for this church. We're real excited about it.
I'll tell you, and I, of course, I've known this about Eddie, his discernment, because he and I have been friends, but I haven't said anything to anyone because it was a process that you all were going through. But I can just tell you, I've seen him firsthand when I went to Christ at the time United Methodist Church in Jackson, Mississippi, where he had been appointed to walk them through a discernment process, which was not really a discernment process. It was it was already decided for the most part. But man, I'll tell you what, I got my rear end handed to me by a handful of those folks in there. Some of those old guys, they were not happy. But I mean, the way he led and the way that he tried to keep things civil. I mean, that's a tough place to be sent into a place where you're the enemy and you have to be the pastor and lead through that. So he's got scars. I hope that you treat him nice up there.
He'll be treated nice, and just for your audience, if you want to hear two good sermons, you can go online and hear Eddie Rester's sermon on the day they took the vote, and his sermon on the week after they took the vote, and they moved this old guy to tears. I'll say that.
Wow.
Pretty powerful.
That was a tough thing, and it's one. I mean, any church that went through a vote, minus a couple of these where I would call it homogeneous.
We went through
church.
a vote, John.
Oh, wow.
You did?
I was getting such a hard time about me not letting the folks here at Lover's Lane vote on whether they wanted to disaffiliate that I told them, I said, okay, we're going to vote. We're going to vote whether we want to go through a process to see if we want to disaffiliate. And we announced it for 3 weeks. And after each of the worship services, we had a vote. Do you want to enter a process to disaffiliate? And it was about 97% that they didn't even want to go through a process. So that's the church he's coming to, and it sounds like to me he deserves such a congregation. I think they'll get along quite well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk and Matt, you jump in. I know you don't know Stan as well as I do, so I'm just taking over. But one of the things that you have been a voice in the last couple of years with the United Methodist Church and going through things. How are you feeling now? Do you look back on that? Are there things you regret or you're proud of? And how do you feel the denomination, or at least from your perspective, like where we are now as a church? You were involved in a lot of this.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the people who want to be United Methodist are United Methodist. And I feel like for United Methodist, our best days are in front of us. Yeah. Part of what I want to do in retirement, I mean, I'm 65, and I'm not ready to quit doing ministry, but I do want to do different ministry. And I want to help churches going through transitions, particularly our largest churches that are going through pastoral transitions. I've seen it done very well here with church difference makers, and I just think that the better we take care of our larger churches in transition, and our medium-sized and smaller churches for that matter, the more inviting we're going to be for younger persons going into ministry who see the civility in how we do transition pastors. And I think the inclusion that the United Methodist Church has cast our lot in is very, very attractive. And by and large, United Methodist Church has not been very successful in attracting the younger generations. But I do think that we have a really good chance to live into a model that will be attractive. And I think we're seeing that here in some of our services that are served by younger pastors, as will our traditional service be soon. We're
It'll
attractive.
be served by a younger pastor soon.
It will be. It's attractive to younger people because they like I think the realness, the genuine openness and inclusion of others that the church tries to be about.
Yeah.
So I'm bullish on the United Methodist Church. It's been very painful, but maybe it's been a time when we're going to be a stronger church in being clear about our identity, and maybe those who left will find their way in the kind of church they wanted to create. But I think the time has passed for us to be looking in the rearview mirror or harboring any kind of resentments. That's what I've had to work through. Just move on and look forward to the future and build the church that you think is going to meet the needs of this broken world that we're in right now. We got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about our churches and what I see going on in our churches.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that if you look back on it, hindsight's always 20/20, and I always look back and think, what would I have done differently? Is there anything you look back over the last couple of years in your leadership in the denomination that you wish you had done differently?
Wow, that's a good question. There's probably a lot of things I wished I'd have done differently. I don't regret speaking out again about what I believed. I don't. At times I might have gotten a little bit too ugly about it. I don't know. But I did feel like that there needed to be a voice, because I think that I think we had a void of leadership.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you've done, John, and what the podcast did. Y'all have had some great shows right in the middle of all of the disaffiliation. But we needed voices, and so I don't regret speaking out. Sometimes I wondered if I spoke out with the right tone, I guess. But here at Lover's Lane, I felt like that we navigated that extremely well. The people who wanted a more conservative approach, quietly left, not leaving and making a scene. Because I think even the people who left love this church, love what we stand for. They just may have been. I think a lot of people got caught up in the political, the national political scene.
Yes.
I think that
That's right.
was a big determinant.
Yeah.
And still is.
And so I nothing I could do about that much, or any of us. But it's just kind of the culture we're in right now. It's a very divisive culture, and navigating through that is not the easiest thing.
Yeah, I've always wondered historically, like, all of the mainline denominations have gone through this. Baptists have their own thing they're going through with women in ministry and sexual abuse issues, and Catholics have their own things they go through. But I've wondered, the Episcopalians, Presbyterians kind of went through this maybe, I wouldn't say 10 years before us, but anywhere from like 8 to 10 years before we did.
Yeah.
Longer.
And ours happened right as the political division in our country was really starting to explode. And I kind of look back at sort of the 2016 election and then forward, because that was when we were entering into all that stuff. And it's just, man, the politics and the racial stuff, and then the pandemic, and then you put denominational disagreements on top of that, and people didn't know how to separate a theological, biblical conversation from a political, cultural conversations, and everything got imported into the church, which is for us. I say it was a sort of a combustible mixture when we went through it, and a very strange set of factors that were part of the ingredients of our experience.
Yeah, I think so. And the nature of our church, that has always been a church that has said you don't have to be of one mind to be here. And, we represent so many different viewpoints, especially politically, and that's just been our nature, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that nature really fell out of favor, in such a divided world. I had lunch with a guy not too many weeks ago, and he left the church. He left over inclusion of LGBTQ folk. But he asked me at the lunch table, he said, would a guy like me, who is a MAGA Trump guy, would I be welcome at Lover's Lane? And I said, well, of course you would be. I said, we've always been a church that you'd be sitting on the same pew with people who are very different than you are, theologically, politically, culturally even, in our place. And I said, that's just kind of who we are. We're a mixture of people. I do think that is who we are. But, the tone today is that it's much better to be more homogenous, related to your political persuasions, your theological persuasions. And, a lot of our churches are getting more singularly defined.
Yes.
And that's just never been who we are, and I don't think it is who we are today.
Well, and it seems like that's not who the church is at the end of the day, right? If Paul says in Christ there's neither Jew nor Greek nor slave, those are categories, right? But in Christ, those things don't exist as dividing walls. Right?
Yeah, the irony is, if you read the Bible, if you read the Bible,
wait a minute,
you can make a stronger.
Read the freaking Gospels.
You can make a strong case for the kind of church you're talking about, Matt.
Yeah.
And ironically, the Bible's been been thrown around and made so narrow in so many different ways. We forget the main thrust of Paul's letters, Jesus' ministry. It has always been about bringing it together, and uniting in love.
Yeah.
But we can only, I think, do our best at that where we're planted, and see if that doesn't create somewhat of a movement. We hope.
I'm interested to note the presence of just the strong recovery ministry that has been a part of that. How has that shaped the life of your church? Not on the fringes, right? Not the drunks that meet in the basement, but when those folks end up kind of coming up into the pews and then into the committees, how has that shaped the life of your church? The way that you have approached differences. Lover's Lane. Since I grew up in Dallas and in Carrollton, and since I was a little kid, Lover's Lane was this bridge building church. I mean, people all over the conference just knew it as just these were kind of the freak shows that were just, they would build a bridge to anybody, you know.
Yeah.
And so you'd go and when I was a kid, I'd go and visit, and it just felt like, wow, this feels like the Mall of America, you know. There's just people from all. So how is like folks in recovery shaped, if they have shaped your own ministry and the tenor of your church?
Well, I think folks in recovery is at the very heart of the culture of Lover's Lane. I think in the 40s, saying the very first fight and people who left the church at Lover's Lane, the church was still meeting in a house, and Tom Shipp brought 2 alcoholics from Highland Park over to Lover's Lane. And I read a letter that some guy wrote, and he said, "We're not going to be part of the first alcoholic church of Dallas. We're leaving."
Dude, I want that letter. That's awesome.
Yeah, and Tom said, look, he was 27, I think, at the time. He said, "Look, these people who need us are people who need us, and if we're not here for people who need us, then why are we here?" And so they dismissed Tom, and they had a committee meeting, and they decided, we're going to stay with our young preacher, and those alcoholics are going to be welcome here.
Wow.
So the very first contentious vote they had was whether or not to accept alcoholics into the membership of the church. And we think, well, that's a weird thing, but back in the 40s,
oh my goodness,
I mean, if you were an alcoholic, you needed to get your act together and clean up, and if you're going to come around the other nice people at the church, because you got a problem, right?
Yeah.
So that seed, I think, created such an openness to other people who might be dealing with whatever sin it was, that it just created that kind of strange, you're welcome here, we're not going to question. And then when we hit issues regarding LGBTQ and other things that have been divisive, it was like, this isn't an issue. It's just a different way that we're reaching out to people who some other churches may not accept. And so Lover's Lane changed me. I'm going to say that. It changed me. And, you know, I would have been on a little more the conservative end of this back in the early 2000s. And Bill Henson died. I wrote a book about Bill Henson. I told Bill Henson's story. I told about how, you know, his views on inclusion of LGBTQ folks, homosexuals, we called it back then. And I don't know what it was, but we featured a story of one of our gay members on a marketing campaign we called wantoknowwhy.com. And we featured an African member story, which was amazing. African people started coming from everywhere. We featured a deaf person's story, and deaf people started coming in great numbers. We featured this gay man's story about how he found his sanctuary here, and gay people started coming. And I'd just written a book on Henson, and all of a sudden we've got refugees from Africa coming, and we had refugees from ABC Baptist Church, Church of Christ Church, you know, you name it, who were saying, you know, we were kicked out of our church, or we never felt welcome, or this happened or that happened. We were hearing their testimonies. They weren't sneaking in. So I had to reach a conclusion that I was going to baptize these folk who needed baptism. And I remember distinctly going to some of my evangelical friends in the conference and telling them what was going on at Lover's Lane. They had supported me politically for general conference, and I said, y'all just need to know this. I'm baptizing gay folks, and they're joining our church, and we're hearing their stories. They're not sneaking in, and I've made a choice. Well, I got a pretty good lecture from several, but I never backed off of that position because I felt like the Holy Spirit was right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And I had deaf people and African people and LGBTQ people getting into the same waters of baptism. We were immersing most of them out in our garden, and we weren't changing the water out between groups. I mean, they were all getting in the same water, and we were all baptizing the same way. And I felt like that's when my change started taking place in about 2006 or so.
That's it's interesting that the Lover's Lane story and Chapelwood's history, they have some similarities because Chapelwood is in a wealthy area of Houston, and kind of has this from the outside almost like this country club church kind of mentality, and people are very blessed here. But very early on, when Kelly Williams was pastor here, they started hosting AA groups. They were the first church like in the city of Houston, if not very early on, to host AA meetings or AA groups or start hosting these together. And there was a lot of blowback as well from people here for that. And but there were the DNA of the people here that even though they were blessed and had resources and lived in a nice neighborhood, they've always had this mentality of what it means to be the church. Always had this, like, we're here. At Chapelwood for years, we've always said we're blessed to be a blessing. And you're blessed for a purpose. And so when Peter says, you're to serve others with the gifts that God's given you, that you're not just blessed to have all the resources or all the giftedness for yourself, you're to do something with it. Yeah. And so that's what led to, birthing Mercy Street 26 years ago, or different worship communities that we've started or had. And I remember I was actually talking to a guy Sunday morning. We have a group of guys that come and pray with me on Sunday mornings before I preach. And I hate to say that I'd almost forgotten this story, but like the first month or two that I was here, we do baptisms on the second Sunday. And when I came that summer, I'd gotten an email from staff, and they said there's this couple and they want their baby to be baptized, but it's kind of been put on hold for a while until you get here. That's always great when the new pastor gets to inherit, Well, it was a gay couple, and they wanted to have their child baptized. And so when I was thinking about it from a very Wesleyan Methodist sacramental understanding of baptism, and it's like, okay, fine, we'll do the baptism. I mean, I didn't even hesitate. It was a non-issue. I mean, how many baptisms have you done of divorced families, parents standing there, or the guy standing there and he's having an affair with someone or whatever else? I mean, the baptism is God's work in the life of the child. Yeah. It's not approving, the sanctity of the mother or the father. They make the baptismal vows for their child, and they did. But I didn't even think about it. And we had people that were so mad about that, and in my office, and saying, you're setting, I know what you're doing, and you're taking us down. I was like, oh, let me explain to you how baptism works, how we think about this. But it didn't help. And it wasn't anything. I wasn't doing it to send a message. I was just doing it because that's what we're supposed to do. Right? And it was the kind of thing that this church had done. Yes. This church had always been moving out into the fields of mission, to the marginalized, to serve, because we've been blessed to be a blessing. And so it seemed to me to be in keeping with the DNA of Chapelwood. And I think those are the things, like you say, there's those little narratives along the way that create the church that are really, it's like, I didn't bring that stuff with me. It was already here. Right. And I felt an obligation to continue to live into that. That's good. To continue to hold on to that DNA, if you will. Kind of like you're talking about doing these narratives of Tom Shipp and passing them on to Eddie. I think that's a brilliant thing, because, stuff that was done here while Kelly Williams was pastor 37 years, and he's been retired 31, 32 years, right? So, but all that stuff still feeds into who we are and what we do. And I think people don't give that enough credit.
Yeah, I think so. It's like our own development. A lot of who we are is formed early on, in our lives. And I think that like Kelly was there for so long, Tom was here for so long. It's short-sighted not to see how they impacted the church and its development in the future. And if you try to get away from that particular culture, you're getting away from really your essence, your authenticity. And that's one thing I've learned here too, is, nearly everything I knew in Houston. I mean, I did evangelism for Bill in Houston. We were taking in 700 people a year. It was a big church, growing church. And, I couldn't force those old models here. They didn't work as well. It had to be different. And I think that getting in touch with the church's culture, like you're saying, blessed to be a blessing, that's part of that culture. You come to understand what that means, and you try to exploit it. You try to to make it the main thing. And it didn't take me too many years, but I think I finally gotten it after 27.
Well, the last thing I just like to hear you maybe. So I'll be 55 in a couple of weeks.
Dear God,
and
that's old.
You don't look a day over 56.
Dude, look at my gray hair. I'm way younger than you are, and you still
look at my gray hair.
No, dude, it's just so good. You could do a commercial for hair products. Your hair is always so good.
I use no products.
You don't use products. It's just natural beauty. God.
No, I've got Baptist hair.
This just turned into some Ricky Bobby
Baptist hair
commercial.
But
go ahead, John. I interrupted.
No, you're fine. I get interrupted all the time. But I was going to ask you, like, as I actually now at 55 am starting to think about. I'm not ready to retire. I'm not. But I mean, I start thinking about that now. I start thinking about
a fantasy, John.
It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy. But like, talk to me about this threshold crossing, because it is a threshold. You're not even fully into it yet, so you can't speak on the other side of it. But leading up to this and the discerning of making this decision, I mean, did you know 10 years ago it was going to be 65, or did you know? Like, did the light come on, or like, what happened? What magic happened?
Well, I'll tell you what happened to me when I was young, like you. I was about 55, and we had a church schism, our first of like 3. I think I've counted 3 since I've been here. This was a pretty bad one. It involved our music department, and everything was going to hell in a handbasket, it felt like. So I just decided, I think I'm done. So we had a pretty high profile member leave the church and came in and said, we love you, but we're just looking for more of a neighborhood church. And I said, oh yeah, I get that. So I called my bishop up, Bishop Rhymes Moncure. And I knew that everybody's going to hear about this member leaving the church, and so I just wanted to, say, hey, Mike Rhymes, it's going pretty good here. I mean, we still got a little conflict going on, but I think I've got a handle on it. And oh, by the way, so and so, they're leaving the church, but they said, it really wasn't me, but it was looking for a neighborhood church. And all of a sudden, on the other end of the phone, I hear, Rhymes, my bishop, here I was about to cry, and he's laughing uncontrollably on the phone. And then he said, this is when the light came on, Stan. Lover's Lane ain't your church. Lover's Lane ain't, and he named the person, it ain't their church. Lover's Lane is God's church. And you get yourself right back down there, and you keep serving God's church until I tell you otherwise. And then he ended, oh, we'll see you later, Stan. I can't tell you how much that meant to me. Probably saved my ministry.
Yeah.
But more than that, it gave me a perspective that we need to get beyond our ego. We need to get beyond what other people think. And we need to realize it's not my church, it's God's church. And I'm going to continue to serve God's church. And that's the way I tried to approach it for the next 10 or 12 years, however long it was. But for me, I knew when I came here at 38 that this wasn't my last church to serve. I just knew it. I said, I'll serve here until I'm in my 50s. And then I'll go to my last church or something. And I had a plan that 21 would be my year that I'd move to something else, whatever it was. But then the 2019 General Conference happened. And I felt like I needed to get more involved, so I was elected to the delegation for the 2020 General Conference. And then COVID-19 happened, and, it just seemed like it wasn't time to retire in the midst of all of that chaos. And before long, here I am, 65 years old, 4 years beyond when I thought I might be moving to something else. And I started just assessing with the team. I went to the bishop and asked him if I could start a transition team. He said, sure. I said, I don't know if I'm going to retire in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, but I know I need to be thinking about it. Now, usually when a preacher gets to that point, it's not long off.
Yeah.
And that team has been so helpful to me. I still meet with them. And they suggested that I needed to get some psychological help too, some professional help, and I'd gotten away from having a good counselor, so I got me a good psychiatrist. I mean, she's really dynamite. And all of that together helped me to kind of assess. My parents' health was, and Tammy's parents, all four were, really in need of more attention. I felt like the church was in need of younger senior pastoral leadership, really, to do the kinds of things I knew that we needed to do. And I just discerned that, it's time. And I am young, in my opinion. I do have more I want to do, and I'll be able to do it. But the most important thing that the transition team helped me work through was what you're going to do next. What's your next? When you get a handle on what your next is, and when you get excited about your next, then it helps you to let go of the reins that you've been holding on to for so blooming long. And the church will be just fine. I am so proud of our staff, our congregation, and how they're getting ready to welcome my successor, Eddie. And it feels good. I mean, it feels good to me. It feels natural. I mean, I'm going to grieve. I am grieving. I have grieved, will grieve, but there's a time for me to move aside and let somebody else, step into this role.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wondered, is there sadness about it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's sadness. I did a huge profile funeral just last week, and during the funeral, I was looking around while the speakers before me were taking way too long. And I was thinking, I'm not going to be in this situation with all of these influential Dallasites packing this sanctuary and waiting on me to get up and say something. Never again. And, I'm going to wake up on a Sunday in a few weeks, and I'm not going to have a place to go and preach. And you got to get a handle on that. You got to realize, well, if you're not going to preach, what is preaching but influencing? That's a big word these days. Everybody's trying to influence, and I guess I've been trying to do that a little bit through preaching for 49 years. So how am I going to do it differently? That's the question, because I'm not going to have a pulpit. So writing more, maybe doing a few more videos, maybe doing, a regular show of some sort. But
you need to get a show on the Food Network for your Pickling Parson thing.
Well, that's a good idea, John.
For people who don't know, Stan is an award-winning pickler. Pickles everything. And it's got some good videos on it. I'm not, you're laughing, Stan, like I'm telling a joke. Tell them I'm telling the truth.
Yeah, you're telling the truth, but I've moved beyond just pickling pickles. I've moved to brining meats and curing hams like they did in South Georgia once upon a time. John.
You're like a trapper. So, you're like an 18th century trapper.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm really getting into the to home placing. That's my new word, home placing. And getting in touch with my soul. My new book I'm about to send you a copy of when I get it published is called Farewell, Tending to a Soul. A pastor says goodbye after 27 years of ministry together, and what's next? And part of what's next is my passion, and that is, getting back on the home place and doing the things that physically I can still do. That's another thing about retirement.
Yeah.
The things I really want to do that feed my soul, physically I'm not going to be able to do them forever.
Yeah.
And so you start looking at this window of time when you're physically fit and able, and realizing that the time is now. You've been waiting for 50 years to do it, so get after it. So,
do it.
And the other side of it is I want to still be connected to you and the church and our peers and colleagues. So I'm going to find a way to do some coaching and some consulting and some kind of work that's going to put me in the middle of hopefully influencing the church moving forward, because I really do think that we're in the beginning stages of repurposing our denomination. It's a very critical and important and exciting time, and we all need to be blessed, whether we're serving a Chapelwood or whether we've just retired and doing something new, that we can continue to make a difference. So I'm going to have plenty to do, I think, in the next, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great parting word. I mean, what's your next? When you're thinking about any threshold that you cross, but particularly retirement, I mean, if you don't have some passion about what's coming next and some excitement about it, it'd be really hard. I think it would be, I mean, I've seen people who retire, man, they lose their identity, or they can't let go, or they don't grieve it, or
that's it, man.
And they try to act so much like, oh, all this new thing I'm doing is great, and all you hear is just like blah. So I'm excited for you, and send us some product. Pickling. I'm good with cured ham. I like country ham.
You could be the first sponsor. You could be the first meat sponsor.
The first
meat
now
sponsor. Not first
that
sponsor.
is a great idea. Y'all could have a jar of Pickling Parson apple butter right there.
We will test it.
About halfway through the interview, smear some on a bagel or something, John, since you're down in Houston.
Smeared on some meat.
Brought to you by Pod Have Mercy. Brought to you by the Pickling Parson.
I can see it.
We'll just at the middle of every episode, Stan will come on with a little straw out his mouth and goes, "This week our special is pickled okra."
Let me tell you something. All joking aside, you guys are tearing it up, and y'all keep doing Pod Have Mercy, because I'm telling you, it's making a difference. Oh, and maybe you hear that, but you hadn't heard it from me lately, so here it is.
Thank you.
You're doing
a great job. I value our friendship, and I appreciate you so much. Thanks for joining us today, man.
You bet.
And we'll see you soon. Stan's a good dude.
Man, I have some ideas about what he could do in retirement south of the border.
Yeah, he loves all that stuff. He'll be good.
But I wonder if we can get him down here for a little while.
Well,
he'd be pretty great. Have an old dude just walking around here.
An old dude. You have an old dude.
I'm older than you, John.
You are older than me. That's what I meant.
Am I the old dude
You're
walking around?
Dude. It wasn't me or Jeff.
Wait a minute. I just see.
It wasn't me or Jeff.
That was a
Who'd you think I was
boomerang.
talking
That hit
about?
me right in the head.
Wow. Well, hey, that was good. Jeff, anything else? Make sure you like and subscribe, especially on this one. Some of these thoughts, share with folks that you may know. Share with people in Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Share, somebody in Dallas.
People in Dallas
They need to know about Lover's Lane.
Yeah, and Pod Have Mercy.
Yeah.
That's a good combo right there.
It is a good combo. Nothing else? We're good? All right. Well, I'm John Stevens.
I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.